And we are live.
Great.
So, anyone who is jumping on, I'd like to welcome Karissa Marsh onto the YouTube channel. So, thanks for joining, Karissa.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And Karissa is a health actuary, and both of us actually worked prior at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona. And then we were both officers on the Arizona Actuarial Club, which you still are, and I'm not anymore. So hopefully that's going well.
Yeah, it's going good.
That's good. So to back up, my first question for you, which I like to ask a lot of people, is were you good at math from a young age?
I think math was my strong point when I was younger. I was really good at math and reading. And I think because I was a little good at math and mom really wanted to push me to do math, I absolutely hated math until later, mostly probably being rebellious. But yeah, I think I had a decent aptitude for math. I struggled when I got to the actuarial exams though. My degree was in finance and they don't really go into in-depth calculus in finance. So by the time I got to exam P, I was pretty flabbergasted of what were those squiggly integral lines.
Yes.
So there's definitely a curve. We're like, yeah, I'm great at math at like the subtraction and multiplication stage, and then you get to the integral stage and you're like, I suck at math.
Yes. No, I know. And that, I mean, and on the exams, they make it extra hard too, because you have to know everything in a limited amount of time too. So,
yep.
So when did you first hear about the word actuary or what actuaries do?
You know, I didn't hear about it at all in college. You know, I graduated around the recession time, and there really wasn't that much of a job market available. And luckily, an insurance company took me on once I graduated. And I was taken on as an underwriter at the time. Still had no idea about being an actuary. And working as an underwriter, I worked somewhat closely with actuaries. It was in a very flexible underwriting role where we weren't just putting data in a template. We really had to think about things critically and are we doing the right thing for this group and make changes. And
yeah.
When we made changes, we would talk to the actuaries, and I realized it was a lot of the same skill set. Like the underwriting is you're doing a lot of analysis, you're evaluating risk. You had a lot more soft skills because you're working with sales and you're working with groups during the negotiation stage.
Right.
Actuaries, it was pretty much taking that analysis and multiplying it by 100. But that's what I really like.
Yes.
It was a good next step for me. I did a couple of years in underwriting, and luckily that same company was able to open a role in actuarial at the time. I hadn't yet sit for an exam, so I understand that was really rare, and I'm really thankful for the company for doing that. But since I've been able to catch up on that. But yeah, I moved to an actuarial role in health pricing, and I've been in health actuarial ever since. It's been great.
That's awesome. So you kind of got the exposure with doing the underwriting and then moved into actuarial. Although I would say if I were looking at someone's experience, I'd almost prefer someone with underwriting experience over someone with no experience in one exam, for example. So yeah. That seems like a really good background to have.
It's a good route too. Like if you maybe didn't get that internship in college, or like you said, only having one exam and maybe not being the first pick round for actuarial, and you need to get a job now, I would highly suggest underwriting because you work with actuaries, you're learning the same skills, you're learning, the same underlying data pretty much between deductibles and coinsurance and what claims.
Right.
You can take that anywhere. So it's a great first step towards the actuarial career.
And actually, since we're on this topic, I've had people ask me this before, but I've never actually worked in underwriting. I've worked with underwriters. What would you say is the difference between underwriting and actuarial at an insurance company?
I think there's definitely a few differences. I mean, actuarial, you definitely need to have some soft skills too, but probably not to the extent of underwriting when you're entering the negotiation stage. And
yeah.
needing to work directly with sales or directly with a group to come to a resolution, or at least at first. You'll probably need those soft skills later on in your actuarial career, but at first, when you're really just taking on a technical role or working with the data, you might not use those skills as much. Whereas actuarial really takes the analysis portion of underwriting and takes it to a way more intense level. Like, you may be filling out or have an idea of what trend is when you're underwriting, and you may be able to calculate it from a high level, but you're not really going to know the different components of trend, or maybe all the market forces that would affect those, or other items that go into that rate that you're negotiating for underwriting. That's all
right.
on the sales side. So you get kind of a good basis knowledge while you're in underwriting. But I say definitely actuarial is where you're going in depth into the data and coming up with a fair rate based on multiple different factors, at least for pricing anyway. You could be forecasting or reserving. So in instances, but yeah, I say definitely actuarial is taking that analysis level of the underwriting and really stepping it up quite a bit.
No, that's a good way to describe it. And I mean, that's why I think underwriting is such a great background, because I've actually suggested that to some people that have looked for actuarial jobs and have had trouble finding them. You know, if they're having trouble getting their foot in the door, at least, like, underwriting is a great place to start.
Yeah.
So you said you studied finance in school, is that right?
Yeah, my degree is actually global business with a concentration in finance from.
Okay. So that's a pretty good background. And you probably had at least some math background then in your finance classes, I would guess.
Yeah, it definitely was. It just wasn't the exam P statistics type.
Yes,
math.
like the heavy math type stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it was more like the FM type math, like the capital asset pricing model and stuff.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay, but the integrals and, no, that I had to learn from scratch. It was not fun.
Oh, wow. So did you have to do like calculus from scratch then?
Yeah, I never had to take a calculus class. I got away with advanced algebra and geometry and like those.
Wow. Okay. I thought you were kind of just joking when you said the squiggly things like that, but
No.
you had taken calc. That's crazy. So you actually learned all that on your own then.
Yeah.
Did you find that you were able to go through the exam material without like doing a traditional calc course, or did you kind of have to back up and go through calculus?
I thought I would be fine since you go through college and college seems easy and the math class seems pretty okay. And then you get to like the actuarial exams and you realize that's just a whole different level of math. So I went in pretty cocky, I'll admit, to my first sitting.
I think a lot of people do.
I'll study for a couple weeks and I'll be fine. And I think we all know how that turned out.
Yes.
So yeah, I had gotten an ACTEX manual, and I didn't take the full course, but the ACTEX manual at the time had a really good, like, beginning calculus section at the very
Okay.
And I think I knew that word for word by the end of studying for exam P, because I would go through like every problem and then take it back to the beginning and be like, okay, well, in this calculus introductory section, it says to do X, Y, Z. And so that's pretty much how I got to that background calculus knowledge. But
wow, good for you. That's impressive.
Yeah, made me wish I would have taken that class in college, though, I tell you what.
I believe that. Plus, you were a little like, by the time you started exams, you were probably a little far removed from school because you had been working for a little while and then you started up on them. So
yeah, that's true. I can't even say I would remember that much at that point of the intense math stuff. So
yeah. And so you went to school in Las Vegas, is that right?
No, actually, went to ASU.
Oh, you lived there at some point, right?
I did. I graduated from ASU, and when I graduated, the job market was really poor. And luckily, I'm so lucky, this insurance company took me on for my first position in Vegas. And it worked out great. I was there for a few years. It was really a great experience. That was the underwriting position.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then when
And
they,
what company was that?
I'm sorry, I missed it. Go ahead.
Which company was that at?
I'm sorry, it's breaking up a little bit.
Oh, is it breaking up?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes if we give it a second, it'll catch up. It does this sometimes. Let's see. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, I was just saying, which company was that?
Oh, it's actually the same company I'm with now. When I was with that company for several years, I moved from the underwriting role the um, to the actuarial role, and then
Nice.
yeah, that's when I met you. After that was in Arizona.
Okay, cool. Yep.
Yep.
Very nice. So you kind of started out in health, and I mean, is that basically kind of why you chose the health route? Is because that's where your first job was?
Yeah, and I think that I mean, definitely that certainly influenced why I continued with health. I think once you have experience for a couple of years, you really want to build on the experience that you have already attained and not have to start from scratch in a new field. And honestly,
Yeah.
there's a lot of opportunities in health. It's constantly changing with the political climate, and new things are constantly getting passed or need to be reevaluated. So honestly, there's a lot of growth in health. So I wouldn't change it now, even if I could go back and change which field I went into.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, I've found that like a lot of people, they'll kind of choose their route based on what their first job is in. But I do think that, I mean, me being on the health side as well, that's where my experience is. I feel like there's a ton of opportunity on the health side, and it's a little bit newer than some of the more traditional type actuarial roles like life insurance, property casualty. I mean, health has been around for a while. It's just that actuaries maybe haven't been involved as long as some of the other fields. So I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and the constant changes are an opportunity for actuaries. Risks need to be quantified,
Hmm.
evaluated, and there's just definitely room for growth.
So if someone was like trying to choose between, life, property casualty, health, like which to go into, would you give them any advice, or would you just say apply to any job you can get?
Probably don't be picky for your first job. If you only
Yeah,
have
yeah.
one offer, don't not take it. Yep, I don't know. I would give them my experience that I've really enjoyed health. But given that I haven't worked in property and casualty and can't give that experience, so I think I would urge them to do their research and find out which field they'd most like to end up in. I mean, the first couple exams are shared, so they should be fine if they choose either. But yeah,
Totally.
but I wouldn't. I would say health is not a bad decision.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And in your experience at various companies, have you been in mostly pricing type roles, or have you been in different types of roles at health companies as an actuary?
I've been in mostly pricing roles. I'll caveat that with I did do consulting for a little bit, but I'd say even in pricing, some roles are not split out completely with forecasting. You'll still be forecasting if you're in pricing. You'll still be evaluating some type of reserve when you're in pricing normally. I think a lot of the ACA plans definitely have some new items that might be outside of a pricing role that as a pricing actuary you would look at. That's just an example, but I think pricing is a great, at least for my own experience, which is mostly pricing. I would highly suggest it because you're learning a lot about the different types of actuarial positions. So you're not just pulled into maybe just forecasting or
Yep.
like just reserving. You're looking at pieces of all of it to put together what you think this rate should be for the first year or this next several years, 5-year plans, things like that. Like you're doing a lot of the same skills, you're building the same skill sets, and you're getting a little bit of exposure to everything.
And for those who may not be as experienced in pricing or don't know what it is, can you explain like what would go into developing a final premium that's priced? Like what types of things do you look at? Do you look at historical experience? Do you look at profit margins? For someone who's curious about what it means to price a plan.
Sure. So I say you'll largely start from past experience unless it's a new plan where you have to come up with some educated assumptions or maybe look at some outside data. But for the most part, you're looking at past experience. And then you'll be trying to forecast that forward and see what that looks like in the next year. And a lot of that is applying trend. So medical claims, for instance, will typically increase or they'll change year to year based on what the trend is.
Mm-hmm.
So wherever that trend number comes from, if it's a different department or if you're calculating it yourself, you're going to be forecasting the claims forward by that trend, as well as any benefit changes or plan offerings, things like that. You'll be trying to decide what the risk is for the next year based on the plans that you have and the claims and the members that you're projecting to have. And then once you get to a base claim number, that's just the claims. You also need to consider you need to pay salaries and stuff on top of that. You're going to have administrative expenses. There's going to be taxes and fees and all kinds of extras added on top. So once you get to that number, you'll add those all together, and then you'll get to that end premium rate, which you might be building it up from that, or you might say, this is the loss ratio I want to be at. So like claims divided by premium and backing into it that way. There's a few different ways, but those are basically the pieces that you'll put together to get to a overall premium rate.
Yeah, and that's why I think for those who are interested in pricing, it may be a very good route to go into because you get a whole picture of like the insurance company and how it works. Because to price the final number, I feel like there's basically all the components of the insurance company that goes into that. So you really get kind of that deep understanding. And it can be fun to play around with all that and trends. And because with trending, I mean, as you know, there's not just there's the price trend, like inflation over time, prices change. But in addition, like the mix of services change. So like maybe one year I break my arm, maybe another year I get a cold. And so I have different services. And then there's all sorts of things you have to consider like that. So yeah, I think it's a good area to be in.
Definitely. I would definitely recommend it for any new actuary out there.
Yeah. And I know you've been in traditional insurance company roles, and I know you had a consulting role for a little while. How would you explain the differences between being like at a traditional insurance company versus being a consultant?
I say there are a lot of differences, and one's not necessarily better than the other. They're just very different roles. I'd say in a consulting role, you're probably working on a variety of projects. Maybe you're not just in a pricing role, you're also forecasting, or you're coming up with benefit changes, things that might not have normally seen in a pricing role, or you might be reviewing regulations or working with legal to answer some question. I say the work is a lot more varied in consulting. I'd also say there's a lot less focus on exams in consulting, at least in
yes, this is what everyone says.
Yeah, so there's not as much focus because you're not an insurance company in most cases that need to get your rate signed off on. So you don't need an ASA or an FSA on your team. You just need someone with the skill set to be able to help the client answer their questions. Because of that, there's less focus on maybe getting through exams, but you're not punished if you don't get through exams as much. For me, it was much easier to get through exams when I was in an insurance role, honestly. But
right.
But I think that's really it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just different. Like the work is different, the focus is a little bit different, and it's just important to understand what you're looking for and what'll work best for you in the future. I'd say insurance for me was a lot more technical, at least starting out. I think consulting is a lot more soft skills, you're explaining the answer to the problem for a client, or
Yeah.
you're with a client so they'll understand something, whereas insurance is more like just calculate the rate and give me the rate.
Yes, yes, totally.
I mean, obviously there's some bleed over on the soft skills and stuff, but I'd say insurance is more technical, and definitely consulting focuses more on soft skills.
So if someone's looking to choose between the two, if they had a job offer in both, maybe if they're past their exams, consulting might be better. Maybe if they're starting in exams, maybe traditional route might be a little better.
Yeah, and I've I only had a short stint in consulting, but it's my understanding that the growth potential in consulting can be a lot higher. So if you want to consider that also, and you're willing to put in that time to get through exams, maybe that is the best route for you. But there's just a lot of facets around each that probably need to be considered when you're making your decision. But for me, it was easier to get through exams on the insurance side.
No, I completely believe that. Although the consulting side, I feel like you gain a lot, like you said, of those soft skills with like the, maybe interacting with clients, interacting with other departments. Maybe you get to see a lot more types of things.
Yes, definitely. I say you definitely get experience with that working in consulting. Whereas in a actuarial role at an insurer, you might work with some other departments, and then the higher you go, you may be speaking to people a couple levels above you. But in consulting, these are the heads of companies that are coming to you wanting answers to their questions. So if you're assisting them, you're speaking directly to normally the higher ups of some company.
Right.
Meet them in a professional manner and explain to them in a way that they understand. I'll also say that your clients in consulting are typically, at least in my limited experience, will not be as versed in actuarial speak as they will at an insurance company. If you're an actuary at an insurance company, you're likely speaking with other actuaries, or they may have even if they're not actuaries, they probably have a good idea of what medical trend is, or what something is that you're explaining. So, I mean, you still need to explain it in a manner that that they'll understand and will be meaningful for their role. But on the consulting side, you may be speaking to someone who has no idea what medical trend is. They may have nothing to do with
right.
but you're helping them answer this question. So you really need to take into consideration who your audience is when you're working at whichever role, whether it's consulting or actuarial. But I think you will more often get like non-actuarial people that you need to present to in consulting.
That makes sense. So what, like, over the years, you've been in both the traditional roles and the consulting roles. Give people an idea of what your days have looked like, and do look like in terms of, have you mostly been at a cube? Have you worked from home very much? Have you had lunch breaks? Like, what do you work traditional hours?
I'd say that definitely varies on the role. In insurance companies that I've worked for, I've been very fortunate in that it hasn't been super long days most of the time. I think in any job, you're going to have times that are more busy or less busy, and you kind of have to work with the business flow. But for the most part, I'd say insurance companies, it was pretty steady, and there wasn't a lot of super busy times where you needed to work really late or miss lunch or whatever. Like you still got your study time 99% of the time at an insurance company. And I'd say the insurance companies, I've also been very fortunate where I've been able to be in either a partial work from home or a complete work from home role, which, I mean, it depends on your communication style. Do you work better if you work from home? Do you work better in an office setting? And I find that I can be really productive at home when I don't have the extra distractions and I don't have to commute. So if I need to put in that extra, hour or two at the end of the day, it's not a big deal because I don't have to drive home or
Exactly.
worry about running errands on the way. So I think for me, that is a really great experience, and it's a really great opportunity to have. And I feel really fortunate that that is a thing in the insurance roles. I'm not sure on a whole how it differs for consulting. I think the role that I had at the time was, and I think it's understandable that in a consulting role, you're a lot more client facing. You need to be there to support the client's role or the client's needs and their questions. So there's, at least in my experience, less flexibility when it comes to working from home. But my experience was pretty limited. So it's possible that, other companies may have different perspectives on working from home. I will say that the hours were quite a bit actually more demanding in consulting, and really that definitely varies by the client, definitely varies by the office you're in, but that's something to consider if you're considering working between insurance or working in consulting, is that it's quite possible that you might end up working a little bit more or quite a bit more than you would in an insurance role, because it's really based on client need and the questions that they need.
Right.
And that could vary quite a bit from an insurance role.
So when you finished your exams, that was before, or no, you did a consulting role while you were still working on exams too, because you're still working on your FSA, right?
Yes, I finally finished all my exams. I'm on the last step, DMAC.
Yeah, and you're very close. So congrats on that. That's super exciting.
Thank you.
So with doing all your exams, do you have any advice for someone who's just getting started off, in terms of like how did you manage your time between work and studying and having some sort of a social life?
I think for me, it was all about holding myself accountable and having good time management. What helped me the most was finding a time where I was most productive studying and taking advantage of it. And I know this is kind of cliche, but keeping track of the hours that I studied, so that if I had a certain goal I wanted to hit, which was normally pretty aggressive, so that if I missed it, I was okay, but at least shooting for that goal would keep me pretty much on track.
Yeah.
For me, I studied better in the morning, so I would wake up a couple hours before work and I'd put in a couple hours. If I was able to, I'd do an hour on lunch. And then when I got home, maybe an hour or two, but I wouldn't feel too bad if I missed it because I had already studied quite a bit that day.
Right.
That was I think spreading it out too helped, because those huge blocks of 6 hours studying, I mean, sometimes you just got to do it. There's no way around it. But
yeah, those are rough though.
Yeah, it's much easier if you break it up at least a little bit, get your mind on something else and come back to it. And I feel like
I found that, like, I don't know if this helped you ever, but on days where I literally didn't have time to study, I would look at the material for 5 minutes, because I knew I could always fit in 5 minutes. And I was like, okay, if I just look at this for 5 minutes, then I won't forget what I did yesterday or the day before, and I'll keep it in my head. And then maybe the next day I only have 10 minutes. And then the day after I have a couple hours, but at least I felt like I didn't get behind because I kept my mind fresh on the material.
Oh, definitely. I feel like if you go a day without studying, especially at the end, you get such a setback, even if it's just the to keep it fresh, for sure.
Exactly.
And then when I was in consulting and I needed to commute quite a bit to get back and forth, I had put all my flashcards onto an MP3 file, and I would just do flashcards the entire commute there and back. And I feel like that really helped too. It wasn't quite as much as if I was sitting at home and doing it, but it was enough to keep it fresh in my head and keep that knowledge going.
No, I completely agree with you. All right, so do you have, I know we're getting close to a half hour here, so we'll wrap it up pretty soon, but one final thing, do you have any advice, if you had one piece of advice to give someone going into the field, what would you say?
I'd say as a starting actuary, just don't get discouraged. Just keep that persistency. I think that's the single thing that would have helped me, and really what I think would be a good strength is that because there's going to be times when you're busy and you might struggle with exams. And I think almost everybody struggles with an exam at some point. And it's really just staying persistent, not getting discouraged, treating each sitting like a fresh sitting, and just continuing on. I mean, it might be a life thing that comes up, or it might be a work thing that comes up. The best you can do is just keep cranking at it and keep moving forward and progressing and just not getting discouraged and keep persisting.
Is it worth? So it's worth it in the end.
It's worth it in the end. It's worth
All right, there you go. There you have it, from Karissa Marsh, from her mouth. She spoke it. No, that's awesome. And you're almost done with your FSA, so you're gonna be you're gonna have a lot more time soon.
Yes, I'm excited.
And then you won't be on the Arizona Actuarial Club anymore, so you're just gonna have nothing on the side. Like literally, it's gonna be just work.
I know. Well, not for a year on the Arizona Actuarial.
Oh yeah, because you're gonna be president next year. So yeah, exactly. All right, two fun questions for you. I know that you are a bit of a gamer yourself. So, what is your favorite video game of all time?
Oh my goodness. Okay. This
and why?
Okay. I would say Skyrim, just because the multiple ways they put it out with like the VR and the remaster. It was originally on, I think, Xbox 360 or something, and then they remastered it for Xbox One, and then they remastered it for VR, and I played it every single time.
Nice.
So I have like hundreds of hours into this stupid game.
That is hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, and it's a good game. I would suggest it. It's probably dated now, but yeah.
So for everyone who's studying, play a little Skyrim as well.
Yeah.
Nice. And second question is, I know you've lived in a few different states. What is your favorite state that you've lived in?
Oh, that's tough. They all have their perks. I say California is great because the cost of living, or definitely not because of the cost of living.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, like, hold on.
The but was already in my mind, yeah. Mm-hmm. Because the weather is great, and
besides the cost of living, yeah.
Yeah, but the big drawback is the cost of living. So because of that, and because my family and everyone is in Arizona, I have to say Arizona is my favorite. The winter is great. Come visit in the winter. But
yeah, this is the time of year to be there. I need to come down to Arizona to visit because it's getting very gray here in Spokane. So
now's the time.
I know now is the time. February is like prime month in Arizona.
It is.
Well, Karissa, thanks again for jumping on. I really appreciate it. This was interesting, and I'm sure everyone will find this very helpful. So thanks again.
Oh, yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Karissa's out from Arizona. I'm out from Washington. And the next YouTube interview is going to be in a few weeks, which I will announce soon. So everyone have a good night.
Thank you.